Well, the 2025 recruiting class is pretty much in the books, as is Super Bowl weekend in New Orleans, which Sam has no FOMO about whatsoever. We're going to kind of talk about everything of the past week, heavy on the recruiting side, but also, let's get into it a little bit with the Super Bowl dynamic. This is Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit Dat Boot. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jer Roser. I had more of an opportunity because of a kind of a could have been a negative curveball, but became sort of a silver lining to spend the entire weekend in New Orleans. You had to watch from afar and just, have a single tear in your eye as you thought about not getting a chance to be there this year. But Sam, how did this weekend treat you? What was it like to watch the city that we've talked about so much? Has been huge for us at different points in our development to watch it on the big stage, the big national and international stage this weekend.
Super generous that you said only one tier. It was like a week of FOMO, and I don't really get FOMO, so that I think says it all. Let's start at the top. I should have been there covering the Super Bowl. It didn't work out. My heart was a little bit broken. But redemption or vindication, whatever you want to look at it, when your wife looks at you before the Super Bowl starts and says, like, can we move back? Like, let's look at the Zillow listings. I don't know. We talked about it a little bit before the show, but it bears repeating. What happened on New Year's Eve was absolutely tragic, and it just put my personal favorite city in the entire world in such a bad light that is inaccurate depiction of what the city really is like, and it has a interesting reputation to some around the country. So for the Super Bowl and all the festivities leading in and afterward, to be so beautiful, to give everyone such a memorable time. The culture of New Orleans is second to none. The food, the atmosphere, the electricity when you go to that city for a big event. I loved seeing some of the NFL media people talk that it should be on the rotation every 4 to 5 years, with the Miamis and Tampas of the world. I mean, to see the city rebound, about a month or so after a tragic event on New Year's Eve, it was spectacular to see New Orleans properly represented on a national scale. For the game wasn't even was like third or fourth, the way it ended up. But between the halftime show, between the New Orleans festivities, and our boy Devontae Smith having his moment in that Superdome, which he's been waiting for several years to get, the FOMO was absolutely unbearable. Moving back is certainly a possibility. I was like, I wish I could be there. I would trade almost anything to be there. But mostly I'm just so happy for the city. And I know that you had a great time being back home for it.
Yeah, all things considered, if you had told me going into the weekend, hey, so your plan is going to be bouncing down there for some work stuff, Radio Row, etc., see a couple folks on Friday, have some 7-on-7 tournament back up toward Baton Rouge on Saturday, get down there at some point Sunday to watch the game with your Eagles fan friend. If you had told me going into the weekend, hey, a lot of that's going to get really turned on its head because your car is going to get backed into where it's parked on your friend's street, and you're not going to be able to open your driver's side door and all these things, while you're out grabbing a bite to eat. I don't know that I would have been excited about that going in, but the way it turned out in terms of kind of forcing me to spend the full 3 days and kind of soak in the city and get the opportunity to spend that much more time with folks who were visiting from all over the place, it really ended up being a lot, that much better of a weekend than I could have asked for. And now we'll see how long it takes to fix that car over this weekend next. But the vibes were immaculate. The city was packed. People were having a great time. You throw in, particularly in that pregame dynamic, the aspects of emotional release with some of the pregame performances and the moments of recognition for the folks who lost their life, just over a month ago. And there was just so much happening from an emotional standpoint, energy standpoint, in so many different ways. It was kind of wild. And to see that so many people from all over the place enjoyed their time so much, and it seemed like a weekend that meant something in a lot of different ways to a lot of different people was really cool. Having a chance to stop by NFL Live on Friday and watching the hometown crowd kind of pulling at Ryan Clark, and everybody wanted to take pictures with him and stuff. Was really cool. Spending some time with him and his parents a little bit, talking to some of the actual out of town media that, as a lot of us got together later Friday night and talking to some folks from The Athletic or from Fox Sports and different stuff like that, and hearing people kind of surprised. Oh, you grew up here? Like, what's that like? That's crazy. How do y'all feel about all of us descending on your city this way? We're having an awesome time. Do y'all mind us being here? And kind of talking them through how much of a joy it is to have the city be given that stage and be able to kind of show off all of the positives of New Orleans, when a lot of times people do have a tendency to focus on some of the negatives and then see the media talking about it on the way out. I think Bill Simmons on his podcast this week, he and cousin Sal were saying, just do it in New Orleans every year, or make it one of a 2 or 3 city rotation. It shouldn't be a decade in between hosts the way it was this time around. And so that was all really exciting to see, and a great weekend overall for the city.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine myself, and you pointed this out, and I thought about it every day. If I was still living on Mid City, right off Bienville, and I saw all the traffic it took to get anywhere in that city, yes, I think I would have a completely different take. But you remove the day-to-day like stressors. New Orleans, no one can do it as well as no one throws a better party than New Orleans. I don't care if it's crawfish season. I don't care if it's Mardi Gras. I don't care if it's Halloween. Everything is better in that city. So to put the Super Bowl, to have so many players with Louisiana ties, obviously half of the NFL's superstars have ties to Louisiana. For them to be back in New Orleans, it just looked so cool. Obviously, we have a lot of personal connections to a lot of those people, which made it all the more difficult to absorb being away. But I couldn't be happier for New Orleans, and I'm glad that now they put the rest of the country on notice. No one does it as good as the 504.
And a lot really around the city felt like it was more manageable to navigate than I even anticipated. I think there were, like stretches coming in over the weekend or leaving and trying to get through airport traffic heading out of the city on Monday. That, I mean, you kind of expect when there's that many people coming to the city. But if you, as packed as it was kind of around Superdome, Convention Center, Bourbon Street, all of that, I mean, bouncing around Mid-City, Uptown, Broadmoor area. I mean, we went out after the game to Frenchman instead of Bourbon. That was kind of the middle ground. Let's go someplace where it's going to be more lively than where we're at right now, watching the game as folks leave the bar that we were at, but not necessarily get into the insanity of Bourbon Street. It ended up being great over at Frenchman too. It was honestly a little bit less packed than I anticipated it being, but still really, really good vibes all around.
Hot take alert: I personally like Frenchman more than Bourbon.
Yeah,
And
obviously.
you have Dat Dog to close out the night on Frenchman. So I mean, locals know, Frenchman is always the move.
Let's jump into some of the college side of things. This is probably the most time that we've spent talking NFL level ever, but I mean, if you're going to do it, it might as well be Super Bowl week in New Orleans. That would give it a little bit of shine. This past week, the February signing period, we talk about, I think we can kind of officially transition from calling it the traditional signing period, and now it's more of the late signing period than anything, because everything is so centered on that winter signing period in December, and we're continuing to try and shift stuff up where folks are looking at a potentially even a pre-senior year signing period. But there were a few notables that occurred. I think the biggest, from a volume standpoint, dynamic that we saw around Louisiana were the Southland schools, the SWAC schools. They filled up a lot of the rest of their classes now that a lot of the FBS schools had figured it out. And we saw some notable JUCO route guys. That's a dynamic that we're going to talk about. I think we saw some higher level JUCO guys this year than what we have necessarily traditionally seen in a lot of cases. But even going into signing day, I think it was over a 36-hour span where North Carolina offers Jalen Nichols from Neville. He commits a day later and then signs that next morning. And so, I mean, what's your takeaway on watching that? A guy that obviously had a hell of a career up there in Monroe and becomes the first big Bill Belichick win in Louisiana of the new Tar Heels era?
Honestly, I was a little bit caught off guard when I saw it. Not that we didn't know that Bill Belichick and Michael Lombardi have been scouring the country, starting from North Carolina on out, and they made their way to one of the traditional powerhouses of Louisiana, up in the north part of the state. Neville has produced so many NFL players and produced obviously big time college talent over the past 10, 15, 20 years. I just love this. I just feel like we're trying to figure out what Bill Belichick is going to be like as a college football head coach, and what his NFL-esque front office is going to look like, headed by Michael Lombardi, a former NFL general manager. And I love, we talk about, hey, dipping into Carr or Destrehan or Acadiana as traditional powerhouses for LSU or Texas A&M, these high schools that produce talent. Well, Neville does that at such a high clip. Bill Belichick is trying to instill a culture of winning in Chapel Hill. Well, Neville knows a lot about winning. I love this move. Yeah, it might be a stretch in terms of eval, but I trust the NFL eyes more than I do anyone else. I trust Michael Lombardi and Bill Belichick, of course. And I wonder if UNC has any success, how we look back at this move. Like you said, this came together within hours. The late signing period is largely dry. That was I ran errands on National Signing Day last week. I can tell you, I don't even think I changed out of my clothes during the first early signing day. So for Bill Belichick and Lombardi to go into Monroe, to walk out with a player that they're turning over a roster that could see the field sooner rather than later, I'm really curious to see what this trajectory is like. And if UNC is to take a step forward under Coach Belichick, how does this look?
Another kind of rare program to watch come in and pull a guy out of state. We saw Idaho come in and sign Caleb Ricks, a guy we've talked about on the show as someone we like in this 2025 class out of Santa Ma. He had gotten a nice late rush of, I think, some JUCOs that would have loved to give him an opportunity. Hey, come here for a semester, do your thing, and then bounce up to a higher level. We saw some of the FCSs from around the region that were hoping to land a steal in the younger brother of Philadelphia Eagles, new champion cornerback on that roster, Eli Ricks. But the Vandals come in and pull Caleb Ricks out of state, and so he's heading back west and obviously a lot farther north than where those guys lived before they moved out to Louisiana. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out for him long term, if it is a situation where he's in Idaho for a semester or a year and then heads elsewhere. But he's someone that we obviously both like, that, again, a program that we have not probably ever talked about on the show comes in and pulls out of state.
I can remember doing some commitment stories at NOLA.com for some John Curtis running backs that went to Idaho back in the mid 2010s. But yeah, this is not a program that traditionally recruits Louisiana, though they have in the past. Caleb, I think just based off, for any prospective parents or recruits or coaches listening, Caleb has all the talent to play at a lot of different levels, and certainly perhaps higher than Idaho. The timing of how his recruitment, when you decide to make your commitment, sometimes impacts whether schools fill up or can take it at a different time. I could definitely see him transferring after, not to bully on Idaho now, but this is someone whose older brother plays in the league, was a 5-star recruit. Caleb is big. He moves really well. He's probably a safety on Saturdays. But just like his brother, has these long spider arms, has been really productive at Santa Ma. And when we saw him at the Rivals camp in Dallas, he was in the mix for the DB MVP. I think he might have actually had, if he wasn't number one, if he was number two, I can very distinctively remember. So I do think that, I know that he has people who have been through this before with his brother's recruitment. So I do think that more doors will open for Caleb, but just a sign of the times and maybe an indication. You pick one place out of high school, more doors are going to open usually if you have the skill to keep doing it.
He's someone that's been such a playmaker for the Gators the last 2 falls. And then you mentioned some of the camp dynamics. He's repeatedly been among the top performers in camp settings that he's been to throughout his high school career. And I think really started to even gain some traction there, some visibility before he was playing his starting role on the varsity level the last couple of years. But there's so much now. I think conversations that you and I are having with kids and with parents, that so much becomes get your foot in the door somewhere in this insane game of musical chairs that the transfer portal has created, that you just have to find a home where somebody believes in you and is going to give you a chance and just be in that number, so to speak. And we saw that a lot. I mentioned in the open with guys that are heading to JUCOs all over the place now, where you have LaKedron Harvey that's heading up to Hutchinson, Trey Fuller heading to Navarro Junior College, two guys that have dealt with injuries as upperclassmen and just want that next opportunity to kind of showcase, hey, I'm a D1 guy. I'm probably an FBS D1 guy somewhere. Abram Wardell, a guy who, one of the most decorated, if not the most decorated and successful high school quarterback in this class for Louisiana, decides I'm going to go bet on myself at Mississippi Gulf Coast. Michael White ended up with whatever, like 9, 10, 11 interceptions for Mandeville this year. He's going to Coffeyville to kind of give himself a shot there. Dorian Hollins, a guy we talked about after some of his performances in summer camps this year, he'll be heading to Pearl River. And so that list kind of goes on. But these guys, I think, maybe didn't sign the places that a year ago they envisioned that they would potentially end up, but they're going to go play college football somewhere and give themselves a chance to maybe through a different path end up still fulfilling those visions.
Yeah, you talk about Caleb Ricks going to Idaho. Well, yeah, that might have been not ideally what he wanted. Especially, we know that UL was so hot on the trail with him in the middle of the summer. But if he can get on the field early at Idaho, that's going to open up more doors. Same with Abram Wardell going to Mississippi Gulf Coast, or Trey Fuller going to Navarro, or Zay Martin going to Colin. These are guys that are very good high school football players. And if you put, we talk about the 5 stars, the Lamar Browns and the Blaine Bradford choosing between LSU and Oregon and Texas A&M. And, those are guys that, yeah, maybe they can contend for immediate playing time at some of those schools. But in a lot of cases, it's very hard to crack a depth chart as a true freshman. Well, going to Idaho and going to Colin and going to Navarro, that climb is not as steep. And these are good high school players, like you mentioned. Injuries, opportunities, any adversity can kind of set you back in the high school recruiting ranks. But this might be a nuanced version, because high school recruiting, and we've talked about it, has taken a massive hit, not just in Louisiana, nationally. And it's tough. I saw Coach Curtis, Jeff Curtis, one of the assistants at Curtis, put out a tweet that Curtis hadn't signed anyone this year, which is the first time ever that John Curtis didn't sign, a D1, an FBS, an FCS kid, which is, it's hard to even process. To sign at the top.
I think he said it was their first time since like 1970, which I think would have been JT's going back to his first class, essentially, when they were.
He had a losing season that year. Come on, that never happens. It's just it's a sign of the time. This is a national trend, and nobody is immune. You have to give props to the Bryce Browns of the world that are signing double digits still to this day. That's not an easy feat to do. So hats off to him. But when John Curtis is not signing Division I players for the first time since the 70s, it's not up to the coaches, but it's up to smart people to figure out alternate routes. And I think the JUCO route or the smaller school route like Idaho, it might not be ideal, but neither is waiting behind other 5 stars at an SEC or a Big Ten school. So maybe this is the route. If you want to get onto the field and show that you're better than people think, or prove to coaches that believe in you that you are that kid, this is it. And I like it. You put things in your own hands and you take it from there.
I think we're definitely, as more and more of these rules change around the NCAA level and, the eligibility dynamics coming out of JUCO and whatnot, just how many years they're looking at potentially having to play, and salvaging some of that eligibility going the JUCO route, that this is going to be more and more the norm for more and more guys that we're covering each year coming out of Louisiana. Looking around at some of the other programs of note, I mean, you mentioned Carr sending several guys off to the next level once again. Arsenio Bold's a guy that we've loved covering in high school. Bryant Sanchez, a couple of guys that are going up to Pine Bluff together, along with Cecilia's Ellis Stewart. And so I thought Pine Bluff was a school from out of state that was another that kind of caught my attention a little bit. Some of the in-state notables, Southeastern, who always finds really good high school football players from all over Louisiana, as has Nichols through the years. You know, both of those standing out as usual. Southeastern, I jotted down some of the names like Jackson Casanova, the linebacker from Notre Dame, Lennis Finister, a guy I've been watching for a long time at Rummel, Caden Jones from Walker, all district kid over at Walker High, Jamar Jones from Rummel heading Nichols, Dedrick Lasty, a guy we've talked about before, an undersized kid, but productive as could be, heading down to Nichols. A couple of schools that we'd watched not fill up as much on Louisiana talent, I thought took steps forward. We've given ULM some props in terms of their ability to get Fred Clark and then Deshaun Ford, obviously, recently. And I saw, a graphic that Thomas Campbell ended up committing to the hometown Warhawks. And so for a program that has not recruited the home state very well through the years, a couple of nice pieces there. And similarly, the opposite corner of the state, Matt Viator being back at McNeese State, our guy Terrence Cahey being back at his alma mater as a part of that staff, and some of the other coaches on that staff now. I thought they did a nice job of finding some great additions from Louisiana, where they've always had some Louisiana flavor. They've been heavy in Texas, but I like the group that the Cowboys were able to find late as well. Keyshawn Hines, a guy that obviously Cahey knows real well. Cohen Charles there from hometown, and a few other guys. But any other thoughts on just this 2025 class and how some things wrap up as a whole around Louisiana?
No, just to, follow up on you, piggyback a little bit, is there's been a lot of coaching turnover at a lot of the in-state schools. We talked about ULM and some of the yielding some of these big commitments from very successful schools like Opelousas and Neville. That's a good start for ULM. But between Cahey going to McNeese and Gabe Fertitta going to Nichols and all the movement around, you still love to see these same in-state programs recruiting the best high school football players in Louisiana. To our point, Dedrick Lasty isn't getting recruited to the clip that he should for such a productive career at Riverside. Normally, not to say that he's going to have a Power 5 offer or Power 4 offer, but he's going to have more than one option to choose from at the end of the day. Like, let's give me a break. So for these new coaching hires to go take a close look at the state and make sure there are no gems going unnoticed, obviously they're not going to be able to get everyone. But Coach Cahey asking about a lot of kids across the state, Fertitta, all these guys. This is a state that produces hidden gems as much or more than any other state in the country. Look at the numbers. I love it. I think that, it instills a little bit of hope that you're a good enough player and you've made yourself noticed at some point in your high school career, which, people have complained that Louisiana media doesn't pay a lot of attention to those kids. They only focus on this. And this is just stuff I've heard in the last couple of days. So sorry for bringing it to Recruit Dat Boot, but I will say it. It's good to see these kids that do get the coverage, largely from Louisiana versus all y'all, but others as well, to find spots on Saturdays. And that's a props to you, Jarrett. I'll take a very small little line of credit, but really to those coaches that love this state and know that there's a lot of high schools that produce a lot of gems. And if you go looking, you will find them. Just got to put in the work.
We've talked about some of these coaching changes. We just hit on a couple of others. I think it was last week we talked about great to see Brandon Harris out in Austin getting promoted to his level now. We talked about Chase Forcade, who's heading up to Central Arkansas. We talked about some of the guys that we covered who are now stepping into more prominent roles, head coaching opportunities at the high school level. We hadn't talked as much about some of the latest moves. LSU's had several, and I think Alex Atkins certainly headlines the group, a guy that's been a coordinator and an associate head coach and all those things. He comes over to LSU to be a run game coordinator and a tight ends coach, and he's the headliner. But I love a lot of what Kelly and company have done with these hires this offseason, even in terms of some of the analysts, with another guy that we know well, Antonio Parks, who's excited to get an opportunity to come home after, being up in Oregon for the last couple of years. He comes back. Lance Guidry, the former Miami defensive coordinator, I don't think they've announced officially, but the reports were out there. Obviously, the expectation he'd be coming back home. Tim Rattay, the former La Tech quarterback, get us a chance to come back as an offensive analyst, and we see the promotion chain of J.R. Belton and Donovan Tate and company moving up. And then again, another guy who makes us feel old sometimes, Kyle Scheck-Snyder down at Tulane, gets another promotion and is now the director of recruiting for the Green Wave. They bring Colton Leggett back from Ole Miss back to his home state. And so I think we're seeing more and more opportunities for Louisiana guys, or in Alex Atkins' case, guys that have a track record of having been in Louisiana, recruited the state for a long time, a lot of respect for the talent the state puts out, and a lot of connections with the high school coaches around this state. It's just really exciting to see those people get these opportunities at big programs to potentially find those next generations of Louisiana guys coming on through.
Alex Atkins is a tremendous hire for this LSU offense. Obviously, was the play caller at Florida State and really the architect of Coach Norvell's rebuilt offensive line, which was such a weakness when Jimbo Fisher was there, from recruiting, identifying talent, and obviously developing them, which is so critical. His experience with Brad Davis and that offensive line is going to loom large. You talk about the run game coordinator. He's going to coach tight ends. He got to catch up with Ahmad Hudson during the February 1st Junior Day. I think that only bolsters where LSU sits with the legacy target. And on to these next couple of youngsters. You know my personality, and I am a big Grinch, and I very hardly get moved. But I am getting so soft in my 34 years of life. Like, let's start with Kyle. Covered Kyle in high school, and we obviously know when he came back to Tulane after I believe he was at Ole Miss. Kyle
was at State. Cody is at Ole Miss. Yeah.
Okay, so Kyle was at Mississippi State. Was very successful there, recruiting the north part of the state and doing some serious work. And when he got to come back to Uptown, it just meant so much to him. Obviously, being a New Orleans kid, to him to get promoted to director of recruiting is astonishing. I know that he has put his heart and soul into it, and I think his connection, he's for being from New Orleans, and that drive and passion, it's obviously working extremely well. Colton Leggett, when he was at Ole Miss. Ole Miss has signed a ton of boot boys over the years, especially since Pete Golding got there. Corey Adams from Carr, Corey Amos from Opelousas, among several others. Colton going back to Tulane. I mean, Coach Summerall and Schex are already recruiting at a high level. I think that we can only expect that to continue. For Antonio, who has spent time at UTSA with Frank Wilson, briefly was at Arizona State before Oregon came calling, and did marvels at Oregon, helping in the DeCorian Moore recruitment, and had a big role in getting Blaine Bradford out to Eugene just last month. Antonio coming to LSU, not only big for his career, he's a kid obviously from East St. John, who we covered when he was in high school. I'm going to get teary-eyed in a minute. Another young man who has just, obviously, I think we know it because neither of us are phenomenal athletes at this moment. But when you can't carry on your athletic career and you realize I want to be involved in this, but in a different capacity, when that light turned on for Antonio and he went from playing, I think he was a corner for Frank, to being in the staff behind the scenes, it just clicked. And he started recruiting the state of Texas. And what he's done with Texas, Louisiana, and really, the span of the country at Oregon. He brings so much experience and more drive and more energy to that LSU recruiting office that is very heavily Louisiana influence. It's the best thing that Coach Kelly has done since getting to LSU. And you bring in Antonio, I think it's going to really help. Not to say that LSU is ever trailing for guys like Blaine Bradford. I think it just kind of bolsters where they sit. Big picture, Oregon is way less of a competitor now with Antonio in Baton Rouge. So you have to worry about Alabama. You got to worry about Ohio State. That staff's still intact. But Antonio is going to give LSU just even more muscle to flex when it comes to guys like Blaine Bradford and Jabari Mack, and had a role with Lamar Brown visiting Eugene last year. These are big home run hires for Tulane, for LSU, and I'm excited to see how this what effects this yields over this recruiting cycle for 26.
Lamar quote tweeted my story and said, well, this makes this easy now. This is a no-brainer now, which, look, Lamar is quite the showman on Twitter when it comes to his recruiting game. And I'm sure the Texas A&M folks were quickly back in his ear. That let's not get overexcited. We know you we know you have a great relationship with AP, but you got some great relationships out here as well. But that's the kind of excitement for some of these prospects coming through Louisiana right now to see AP back home for sure. And also, just as another point of clarification, neither you or I was ever on Antonio's athletic level, and
Not even close.
There's a video of me dancing on Bienville this weekend after the Super Bowl that can really, attest to that I have no flexibility or mobility left in me to compare to anything that AP has accomplished as obviously a college D1 football player out there in San Antonio.
Well, just to circle back to Mid-City, I have taken many of spills on Bienville Avenue. So yes, my athletic peak doesn't even compare to Antonio's. My point still stands that when the light did click and he realized he wasn't Antonio Gates, he's done pretty well. He's done pretty well on the other side of things.
Any other thoughts you want to close on as we'll see if there's other little tidbits that come up to kind of wrap things up. But I think this is largely our kind of close the book on the bulk of this 2025 class, and then start next week in particular, more heavily diving in on how this 2026 class is now ramping up to the forefront. Anything that you want to add, kind of turning the page, whether focused on the 2025 now largely in the rear view, or the 2026 that we'll be diving into more ahead?
No, I thought this was a great show. A little inside baseball. We had really no idea what we were going to talk about, but we knew we were going to record because we are dedicated to the schedule. And this has been one of the, not to say that other episodes are not fun, but this has been a very fun episode.
Yeah, it was a good catch-all, just kind of at this point in the calendar to close some things and then start slowly looking forward. And we'll be looking again more and more at the 2026 class in the weeks ahead, because they are now at the forefront of the recruiting world, and a lot starts to happen really quickly for these guys at this point. I've told parents repeatedly, so much more is now crammed into not happening until after that junior season happens, because college coaches can't project their roster multiple years out in advance the way they used to. But then folks largely want to be committed or have their commitments in place by the time senior year hits. So we're right into the thick of it now.
We're like in the middle of a storm that never ends.
Yeah, you're ready to kind of take a breather, get a little rest with the 2025 in the books, and it's never really that. We'll be here for all of it, though. Again, he's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jared Roser. This is Louisiana versus All Y'all's Recruit Dat Boot. Thanks, as always, for tuning in.